It's not a peace initiative also in that it has absolutely no vision of any kind of future that is farther from the shortest term. It's all about incremental progress and the gradual realization of interests, much more so than anything even remotely resembling justice or strategic necessity or anything of the sort.
Welcome back to The Focus. I'm John Bruni. A Trump-brokered ceasefire has paused the Israel-Gaza war for now. Hostages and prisoners have been exchanged, families reunited. However brief, this was a moment to savor, and many Israelis and Palestinians are grateful for this. But on the ground, little feels resolved. Both Israel and Hamas accuse each other of violating the truce. The Netanyahu government is conflicted over Trump's intervention. Gaza's population remains hemmed in, bomb-scarred, and heavily surveilled. And behind the ceasefire lies a deeper question. Where do the weapons keep coming from? Hamas and Gaza's other militias have relied on a mix of Iranian backing, smuggling through the Sinai, and locally made rockets built from scavenged parts. Even as Israel tightens its borders, small-scale routes persist, tunnels, drones, and clan networks feeding a steady trickle of arms. Now, as Hamas weakens and rival militias compete for control, that underground economy may be fueling Gaza's next internal war. Tonight, I'm joined once again by Israeli scholar Dr. Ori Goldberg to unpack what this fragile calm really means. Is it a turning point to a permanent peace, or merely the intermission before another act of tragedy? Ori, welcome back to The Focus.
Always a pleasure to speak with you, John. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you. Ori, let's start with Washington. Trump's team has claimed the ceasefire as a historic breakthrough. But is the 20-point peace plan a genuine peace initiative?
Oh, no, far from it. It isn't at all a genuine peace initiative. It's a deal, which is what Trump has always prided himself on generating. And it's a deal between interest holders, a lot of the people, a lot of the powers that be named in that deal, all of them have something to gain from this deal moving forward. It's not a peace initiative also in that it has absolutely no vision of any kind of future that is farther from the shortest term. It's all about incremental progress and the gradual realization of interests, much more so than anything even remotely resembling justice or strategic necessity or anything of the sort. Um, Strangely enough, if I'm trying to be cautiously optimistic, that may actually that may actually speak in favor of this whole initiative because it seems that trying to jumpstart processes in the Middle East that are based on goodwill or commitment to joint moral or legal principles or whatever, especially in the case of Israel, is a problematic endeavor, especially because Israel is a joker. Okay? The rules don't apply to Israel. Israel has impunity. Israel has enjoyed the ability to disturb and do away with any rules it did not care for unless they specifically catered in its favor. And even though Trump is very much not in favor of the Palestinians or care, he doesn't seem to be concerned about the Palestinians in any way. Maybe the best thing, and I might be jumping the gun here, and we'll talk about this some more later on, but maybe the best thing about this deal is that Israel is no longer the single power calling the shots. Washington is in, it's in for the deal, and the deal has been clearly defined in the sense that the first thing that has to happen is for the quote unquote war to be over. And despite Israel's attempts to present a very confident facade along the lines of, we'll go back to the war if we want to, it really is becoming apparent that Israel can no longer do simply what it wants. And that's a good thing. And I don't know that that would have come about had the deal been envisioned and manifested as a full-fledged peace treaty or peace plan, if you will.
If we take the idea that this is as good as it's going to get for a while, will it remain upright because we now are looking at regional involvement in a way that we had not seen up until this point in time? Or is it a case of we've all been down this road before? We've had, the great powers of Europe sit around the table with the United States and Israel. Nothing ever came from anything that they put together. So how cynical should one be about the process itself? Or should one just relax a little bit and say, well, look, a little bit of progress in this horrible situation is better than no progress at all? I mean, it's easy to be cynical, right?
Well, I actually think cynicism works for the general good here. It's good to be cynical about this because this
Yeah.
really is a deal among interest holders, and this really is about what everybody can potentially gain, and not at all about principle or about a common commitment or about any sort of conviction. But again, I think that might be, I'm not saying it is, it might be a good thing because yes, definitely we have regional involvement at a level we've never seen before, even at this very early stage. And we generally have an internationalization of this conflict at a level that we've never seen before. This isn't about the United States taking charge. It isn't about the EU declaring its commitment to whatever and then failing. This is about countries and players who have more than one finger in the pie for various reasons, from Turkey to Pakistan, potentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is good in two complementary ways. First, it's good because it takes effective authority on the ground away from Israel. This isn't this is it's too early to be happy about this or to claim any kind of um, persistent or comprehensive pattern about this process. But already, just the very fact that Turkey is going to establish a permanent base of logistical operations inside Israel is a remarkable thing. And that's not saying it without saying anything positive about President Erdogan or Turkish involvement. This is now out of Israel's hands in many ways. And Israel is trying to spin this as a victory. For example, when Hamas was recently holding its public executions, and Israeli military officers said, "We'd love to help, but we can't because there's a line that separates us, so we can't cross in and help." And these are, of course, militias that Israel is funding.
Yeah.
So all of these tricks that the world has grown accustomed to from Israel, we do it, but we can't. We're sorry. They matter less and less because there are more people on the ground with real things to achieve, with real benefits to realize. Of course, that's also a problem because if this
Mm.
becomes a free for all, if it's all about grabbing the financial advantages of the potential reconstruction, which are supposed to be enormous, if this is all about angling for a bigger slice of the pie ultimately, and this could come crashing around all our heads. But it seems like, again, there's signs for cautious optimism. For example, I'm hearing rumors about renewed interest in the United States of forming a strategic defense pact with Saudi Arabia. If the United States is obliged at that level to both Saudi Arabia and Qatar, Saudi Arabia's traditional rival, in the Middle East, well, that is a serious block that countermands any Israeli plan to simply go rogue or attack or strike. Now there are consequences. So there are very few good things about this deal just yet, but there is circumstantially, for all the wrong reasons, there does seem to be an energy forming that, as I suggested, countermands the bad parts of the current reality on the ground. So cynicism is well warranted. Very good to treat anything anybody says within the framework of this deal as laden with hidden ulterior interests. But maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing or not wholly a bad thing.
Yeah, look, that's a really good thing to say because at the moment, when I'm looking at the situation on the ground, and we'll dig deeper into this as we go on, but it's looking particularly flaky, and I'll get your view afterwards on how you see things if everything does start unraveling. Who is going to be stepping in? Who is going to have the power to step in, especially since the Israeli government will want to have first right to step in and impose its authority on the situation if it does spiral out of control. But for now, let's stick with Trump. Now, there are a lot of people out there who, for whatever reason, will criticize the US president. Sometimes rightly so, sometimes probably they go a little bit over the top. But there is one pattern of behavior that he seems to be very consistent on, and that is he tires easily in terms of his attention span. And I mean, look, this is not necessarily a product of the president himself, although some people have claimed it to be, but he's an old man. And old men don't have the attention span of younger men, especially when dealing with complexity. So, my question to you, Ori, is Trump's tied this deal closely to his own political image. Does that help by concentrating our attention on everything, or does it hinder it by making the ceasefire contingent on the US president and his domestic political supporters?
That's a very good question, and obviously I don't have the answer, and we'll have to wait and see. And of course, you're absolutely right. Trump is not known for his stamina on issues that exceed, a mosquito's attention span. I don't know if we can. Well, no, I mean, again, I think it's a sort of a yes and no answer. On the one hand, Trump certainly views this deal as important. Again, many a time for the wrong reason, like his own personal fortune being won through cooperation with the Gulf monarchies. His good friends in Saudi Arabia and in Qatar, who
Mm.
constantly invest hundreds of millions of dollars in not just the American economy, but his family enterprises.
Yeah.
And also, I think Trump feels to some extent more comfortable in this specific predicament than in other potential deals. For example, an attempt to wrap up the Russia-Ukraine war. That's much, much more difficult as far as he's concerned. And
Mm.
of course, that makes sense because, I mean, for a second, if we um, leave aside the moral wrongdoings and the legal crimes involved in Israel's actions in Gaza. Gaza is very small. It's manageable. You could actually come up with a plan that may cost trillions and trillions, but you could come up with the funds necessary and with a plan that says, let's rebuild it in this way, or it's something that you can do. And I think Trump is actually quite appreciative and sensitive to the difference between things you can do within a given period of time and things that you can't. And also, as far as Trump is concerned, he'll be happy just jump starting this and leaving it to his heir potentially, because any kind of reconstruction in Gaza will take at least a decade. So I don't think Trump is up for it. I don't think Trump has any wish to immerse himself in the details of who's doing what where. But I think Trump has a lot of potential prizes to offer potential allies in his quest to get this deal up and running. And I think Trump also identifies a chance for a realignment in the Middle East that will place the powers that be squarely in the American camp, again, for all the wrong reasons. I think
Mm.
Trump sees a way of getting the Gulf to calm down. With regard to Iran as well, I
Yeah.
mean, here in Israel, we tend to look at the American involvement in Israel's 12-day war with Iran as a great strategic victory. But effectively speaking, it was anything but. It was extremely limited. It did not achieve its goal. And Trump has not gone back to revisit the notion of carrying the fight to the Iranians. In fact,
Mm.
it's the other way around. Now negotiations are not happening directly right now, but there are always conversations, and there's a sense that, when the time is right, this will happen. So I think, again, Trump, you're absolutely right. Trump's not up for it. He's an old man, and he is Trump famously known, even among old men, for his lack of concentration and self-discipline. But for all these reasons, again, this semi-chaotic state in which the Gaza Strip finds itself right now may actually serve Trump's best interest by offering him a win, depending on the way he chooses to spin it. So I'm adopting a consistently optimistic approach to this, maybe because, I'm desperate for some kind of optimism living here. But I do think that there is warranted cause for a modicum of optimism.
Ah, okay. Well, based on that, let's talk about a few uncomfortable realities. I mean, the first thing is, going back to what you've just said, I think that the thing that makes this particular time and place so very different is that the US president does have all these questionable financial dealings with Gulf states and various other places. So I absolutely agree with you. I think that in that sense, we've got an opportunity. I don't know how it's going to be played out, but the opportunity is that, the Trump family is involved in various business deals, from Israel to the Gulf states. There's a connectivity that was simply missing in former administrations, shall we say. So I think that that's probably a good thing. And I say probably a good thing. But then there's the other reality it comes up against, and that is recent estimates have said that it would be about $53 billion to rebuild Gaza. And as you rightly point out, it'll be a 10-year project, although I think that's probably a conservative estimate. I think we're looking at least a generation, so 25 years and $53 billion. The problem, of course, that the Gulf states have to face. Now, look, I've lived and worked in the Emirates, so I know about Western ideas of bottomless pits of oil and money being sloshed around the place. There is that, but in the high stakes of international aid and aid delivery, there are always these hard financial limits that are easily reached. The Gulf states have it upon themselves to rebuild Lebanon. They have it upon themselves to rebuild Syria. And then they have it upon themselves to rebuild Gaza. So, of the $53 billion spread out over a number of years, I don't think they're going to get to a maximum financial endpoint for the reconstruction of Gaza, because they have to then say we can only afford this much because we are also having to support the reconstruction in Lebanon, support the reconstruction in Syria. And speaking of that, Israel has had a responsibility for striking deep into Syria over years, striking deep into Lebanon. Do you think, or do you think that there will be a sort of repatriation that will be forced on the Israeli government at some point to help with the reconstruction process, or is that off the table completely?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Everything you've said. Obviously, there are limits. Obviously, the coffers of the Gulf monarchies are not bottomless.
Hmm.
Certainly not, with the world slowly weaning itself from oil. Um, and we can't assume that the Gulf monarchies will simply foot the bill. So yes, Israel will have to be a part of this effort. Israel will have to perhaps even pay. I don't know. And certainly not, the Gulf monarchies will not foot the entire bill. We will need to have more global funding, and we will need to have strategizing at a global level. In that sense, I actually think China and Turkey can also play a major part should they be so inclined,
Mm.
because they're both such construction and infrastructure powerhouses, and also because China certainly has got the funds to be a part of an effort like this.
Yep.
The political reality or the political payoffs will become clearer at a later stage. Right now, in the chaos, it's simply important to maintain a framework of communications. We're not talking about that yet. And
Mm.
in a way, we can't allow ourselves to talk about that yet. And I'm constantly harping on the Israeli role here because that's my angle, but also because I think it's terrifically important. Israel will learn this lesson that it simply cannot disrupt endeavors at a regional and a global level at will slowly. Right?
Yeah.
You need time for this to sink in, for Israel and Israelis to understand that they can't simply unleash their forces on Lebanon or on Syria. I mean, yesterday was, I think, Israel's worst attack in terms of the human toll and the damage to physical infrastructure in Lebanon since Israel and Lebanon signed the ceasefire. So
Yeah.
it's very obvious that Israel is doing its best to stoke the flames wherever it can, to drive home the point that it may be constrained in Gaza, but it can do whatever it wants in Lebanon or in Syria.
Mm.
I think that this has an expiration date, this Israeli strategy. I don't think it is viable over a sustained period of time. And I think that this has a lot to do with domestic politics in Israel, but it also has a lot to do with the fact that Israel simply can't do it alone. Certainly not when it is facing opposition, and most certainly not when it's facing opposition from would-be allies, not just like the United States, but like Azerbaijan, for example, who is
Yeah.
said to be a part of the arrangement in Gaza, or the Emirates, or Saudi Arabia, with whom normalization is Israel's holy grail. So
Mm.
Israel is going to have to make up its mind sooner rather than later what option it chooses. And it's not going to be framed in terms of Palestinian state and an equitable resolution to the conflict, but it's going to be framed in terms of, Israel will either do only what it wants when it wants, or it will listen to requests, instructions, and interests coming from its would-be allies. And
Mhm.
Israel can choose to go rogue, but that choice has backfired so far and will only backfire more spectacularly as time goes by. And I have no doubt what Israel will ultimately choose. I do know that Israel will make the choice at the worst time after paying the heaviest price. That's a very consistent Israeli modus operandi.
Mm. Now, before we get into Israel's domestic landscape, can we just quickly touch upon that of the US? And specifically, I want to get your view on America's powerful Israeli lobby, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, otherwise known as AIPAC. Were they supportive just to get the Israeli hostages released? Or is there a deeper AIPAC support for Trump's ceasefire and his 20-point peace plan, do you think?
I think APAC is completely devoid of any kind of principled commitment. I
Mhm.
think APAC just snaps to attention whatever the current Israeli leadership, whatever the Israeli current leadership says. But I'm happy to see that we are beginning to observe that even APAC's armor is not completely impregnable. There have been, I think we've already seen two congressmen detach themselves from APAC, refusing to accept any APAC funding in the upcoming House election. And that is a big deal. I don't
Yeah.
know if they represent a much broader movement, but the very fact that somebody is willing to stand up to AIPAC is a big deal, and it reverberates in the context of standing up to Israel and assuming that one can do. I'll share an amusing anecdote with you. Over the past few months, I've developed a relationship of sorts with the Cato Institute in the United States, which is like
Yes.
the hardest of libertarian think tanks on the American right. But
Mm.
they're not MAGA, they're not populists. They're
Mm.
intellectual conservatives. And I've developed a relationship with them because one of their research fellows published an article saying Israel is a liability to American interests in the Middle East, and I just responded very positively. And he wrote me and said, "Oh well, can I send you some other stuff that I've written, or will you retweet other things that we say along these lines?" And I said, "Of course." And
Mm.
so we've struck up an alliance. That's the kind of thing that's happening in American politics right now.
Yeah.
You've got real criticism of the traditional stance vis-a-vis Israel,
Mm.
but also with regard to defining American interests abroad. That's a big deal, and this is coming from inside the Republican Party, not from Democrats. So I think we are in the midst of a sea change in American politics as well. Trump is very conducive to that sea change because of his personal foibles, but it's not exclusively about Trump. It's about a vision for the United States. And AIPAC was very much a stalwart of the old order. The old
Yeah.
order is not well liked,
Mm.
even among the acolytes of the big two parties.
All right, then, but there is another problem in all of this. The rise of anti-Semitism around the world as a consequence of how this war in Gaza has played out, because that really was the cause of it. Um, it's also a weapon that is used by the old Israeli Guard against non-Israelis for being critical of the Israeli government. Um, I think that if you look at MAGA and you're looking at the so-called new conservatives. I mean, I don't know how I consider myself an old conservative. I'm certainly not what you see in the mega crowd, but I will say that if we're now starting to divide up from a generational perspective, there's the old conservatives on the one side and the new conservatives on the other. The new conservatives seem to be playing fast, hard, and loose with terms that could be sort of anti-Semitic. And it's very difficult to, I mean, when you're looking at it from an outsider's perspective, and I'm so glad I live here in Australia, but when you look from an outsider's perspective at the things and the languages that come out of the United States at the moment, you want to believe that the worst of all that stuff is behind the United States. But you've got younger people now coming up and really meaning what they say. I mean, I heard recently on another podcast this morning, quite a credible podcast, that some idiots within the youth wing of MAGA have been talking about kicking the Jews out of the United States. They've been talking about setting up gas chambers. I mean, horrific stuff. And yet they're allied to the Trump bandwagon in some strange way. Um, how do you then how do you square that with the other reality in the United States, and that is that AIPAC, as the old order of Israeli interests in the United States, have been overplaying their hand so long that the anger that has been unleashed as a consequence of Gaza, is fueling this anti-Semitism, which I can't see disappearing anytime soon. The damage has been done now. So how does the United States walk back from this? How does MAGA in particular walk back from this? And should those younger new conservatives who are a bit loose with their lips be somehow publicly reprimanded for going down this particular path?
Well, I'd like to think that they should be, but I doubt they will.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, Vice President Vance has already come out publicly to their defense, talking about pearl clutching in response to WhatsApp messaging. I don't
Yes,
th
that's right.
I don't think anybody I- just like a cliche, a truism is I don't think anybody changes their minds in this day and age. I
Mm.
don't think you have a lot of meaningful conversations where people are made to see the error of their ways or even to reconsider their basic tenets of faith. Uh, but I mean, of course, there's an unholy alliance here. I mean, if Israel invites, if an Israeli government minister invites Tommy Robinson for an official visit to Israel
Mm.
and calls him a great friend to Israel and talks about his great contribution to the Israeli cause. If Israeli government ministers talk about the great replacement theory, they talk about
Mm.
the West crumbling before the alliance of radical Islamism and woke left wing opinions, um, then who's Israel going to blame? I mean, Israel is anti-Semitic. If there was, look, I'll say this because I can get away with it.
Mm,
If there was a modern day Hitler who would be going after Muslims, clearly and particularly, he would find a great ally in Jerusalem at the moment. Okay,
mm,
so Israel is not averse. Israel is weaponizing every display of anti-Semitism, including apparently also putting on fake productions that are meant to stir emotions and stoke the flames and make sure there's anti-Semitism, which is, of course, doing real harm to actual Jewish communities who are suffering from anti-Semitism. Because it's
yes.
definitely true that there is increased anti-Semitism in the world. I am um, on the left, but even I get not vehement, violent anti-Semitic comments, but good anti-Semitic comments, like, "Ori, don't worry, you're one of the good Jews. When
Mm, mm,
something
mm,
happens to you,
mm,
come over to us, and we'll take care of you." I,
mm,
should I tell these good people that they're being anti-Semitic? Of course, they're being
mm,
anti-Semitic.
mm, mm,
But again, I think this has a lot to do, I agree with you, this has a lot to do with the Israeli posture. This has a lot to do with Israel's willingness to exploit any resource within its reach to present itself as wholly and unilaterally in the right, and not vis-a-vis left, but correct, proper.
yeah.
And as long as that is the case, Israel is crassly manipulating Jewish communities abroad. And I think there are a lot of Jews who don't live in Israel would who disagree with that. I think there are a lot of Jews who swallow that hook, line, and sinker. But I think
Mm,
there are a
mm,
lot of Jews who are living outside Israel who have real disagreement with the way Israel is appropriating their lives for its cause, who are angry at Israel making the public assumption, or not even assumption, but linking Jewish life outside Israel to support for war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocidal activities. So this is all happening, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. I can tell you that in Israel, siege mentality is worsening. The sense that the world is out to get us, regardless of what we do, is
mm,
very much a very broad consensus here. So I doubt we will see any of that weaponization decreasing, especially as the world grows wise to what to do about Israel when it's no
mm,
longer just about what heads of government decide to do, but it's about very practical measures like the West Midlands Police in the UK denying Israeli football fans entry to the Aston Villa grounds for the European League game.
right.
That's a very practical thing, and it comes from real security considerations.
Mm,
So
mm,
you can present that as anti-Semitism until you're blue in the face, but people are going to be doing just that. People are not going to want the trouble. An Israeli cycling team was thrown out of the Vuelta and the Giro d'Italia, the two big bicycle races in Spain and in Italy, because it disrupted the race, because you had demonstrations at the end of stages and other
yeah.
teams could not complete their stage, so they threw Israel out. That's what's going to happen. It's not going to be about whether Israel's right or the Palestinians are wrong. It's going to be about the risk of allowing Israelis in. And
Mm.
the more Israel weaponizes anti Semitism, the greater the risk will be. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So somebody's going to have to start thinking practically soon, because otherwise it's just going to get stronger.
It's, it's not helped by some of the language that both Netanyahu and also other retired former Israeli prime ministers have been using on the public circuit as well. They do play the victim card a lot, rather heavy-handedly. I mean, you've got Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that Israel is fighting the war on behalf of civilization, against brutal barbaric tribes and so on and so forth. And
Judeo-Christian,
yeah,
Judeo-Christian sort
Judeo-Christian,
of a.
and well, whatever the hell that is. But yes, all of that. And it's so, um, yeah, I just don't know what to say about when an Israeli leader would be able to recognize the harm he's doing to Jewish people everywhere, in Israel, outside of Israel, because if they actually understand that, they'll be able to pull back and normalize
Oh,
their relations. But
no, I think you're being way too nice, John. I think they understand it completely, and I think they're just vile. And you're not even talking about the derogatory comments made at world leaders like your prime minister
mm,
or the prime minister of Belgium about how, especially Prime Minister Albanese, how he's a weak leader and succumbing
mm,
to Islamic terrorism. And they're just, I really think this is an applicable word. They're vile. Okay, the
yeah,
language that Israeli leaders are using is vile. It is derogatory. It is pejorative. It is as offensive as it can be, and it is intentionally offensive.
mm,
Okay, why? Because Israel is going for broke. Israel wants to establish the fact that uh, um, criticism of its actions is regardless of its actions. That it's about the simple fact that we're Jewish and anti-Semitism and all that, and they're playing into uh, what I suppose is an inherent fear among Jewish communities abroad. But I get a sense that I've got some interesting followers who are in touch with me in Australia. I get a
mm,
sense that even in Australia, where the Jewish community is very conservative and very
yes,
pro-Israel, the official institutions, there is now an alternative. There are other
mm,
Jewish voices that are rising and saying, no, absolutely not, not in our name.
mm, mm,
So Israeli leaders are doing it, look upon it not as a gesture of strength, but as a gesture of despair. They have no other
yeah,
choice. There is
mm,
absolutely no other way to defend what Israel is doing unless it is done at a grand, cosmic, conspiratorial scale. Right?
mm,
Great
mm.
Replacement, Judeo-Christian civilization, the unholy Red-Green Alliance, call it what you will. That's the language Israeli leaders have to speak because there is no other language left to speak.
Uh, Someone from the other side would say, but Ori, this is the price of security. We have to be on a permanent war footing with everybody because we fear abandonment by everybody. So if we keep the heat on, if we keep the victimhood going, if we keep the idea that we're under threat constantly, I mean, what is the idea is Israel would not be secure if it would normalize its relations. Somehow it would lose its what, Jewishness? If it became friends, genuine friends with Muslim partners, I mean, well, so odd. Whereas
Of
the thing is that it would actually benefit Israel in such a
course it would.
huge way. I just don't
Of
see it
course,
happen.
of course it would. Of course it would
Yeah,
benefit Israel. And this whole security thing, look, here's what Israeli security now amounts to. And there's
yeah,
no doubt that Israel is trying to pursue or superimpose a new security paradigm on the Middle East. But that security
mm,
paradigm consists of Israel enjoying complete freedom and complete impunity. Israel can do
yeah,
whatever it wants, whenever it wants, to whomever it wants, for how long it wants, and pay absolutely no cost or incur no cost as a consequence of what it's doing.
yeah,
That is the contradiction of security. That's the opposite of security, not just for Israel, for everybody. Why
mm,
would anybody sign on to that?
yeah,
And that, of course, completely um, denies and refuses to take into account what is happening in Israel. How Jewish society views itself, how it understands itself, how it understands itself with regard to Palestinians, with regard to its neighbors, how it sees itself as innately supremacist, how it seeks to enforce that supremacy because they're monsters and they're animals and so on. I have had a chance to say this a lot over the past 2 years, but it's always good to repeat it.
mm,
It really isn't that complex. It's actually simple. It's what you see. Okay? I think it's genocide. You don't want to call it genocide? Let's call it genocide. There are crimes against humanity. There are war crimes. There are easily more than 100,000 Palestinians killed because of the Israeli caprice that Israel can do so to maintain its security. Israel has completely destroyed the Gaza Strip. There's absolutely no justification for that. It's all in front of everyone's eyes. It's all very much there. Any is the longer, the more time passes, the more Israeli attempts to spin it as self-defense, as security, as call it what you will, the more ludicrous they become because they are in contradiction to a very, very clear, overt, unimpeachable reality. This is reality. This is what Israel has done. Now, you want to talk about intentions. You want to talk about what the Palestinians actually want. You want to talk about what anti Semites actually want. That's all well and good. But here's what Israel has actually done. Israel underwent a horrible attack on October 7th, 2023. Horrible, a massacre. Definitely a war crime, maybe even a crime against humanity. Call it what you will. It's all true. Horrible attack.
Yeah.
The fact that Israel uses this attack as a platform to perform genocide is unexcusable. It is not right. It does not demonstrate a commitment to security. It is not a fight on behalf of Judeo Christian civilization. It is simply something that Israel does because that is what Israel chose to do. And we don't even have to talk about intent. We can just look at the consequences. They are there. Gaza is a moonscape. Israel has obliterated Gaza, and it has done so intentionally and systematically. Even if you talk about the bombing of Germany or the nuclear bombs in Japan in World War II, obviously that was meant to drive home a point, that was meant to create devastation, it was meant to instigate surrender, but it was a one-time thing. It wasn't a systematic campaign. And Israel has been engaged in a systematic campaign to do exactly that. And there's absolutely no reason to let Israel off the hook. No reason.
The more I hear, the more I hear from you, Ori, the more I think Israel is actually a Machiavellian state. It's its own creature. It's creating such a situation. I mean, even I hate to raise this because it is a sensitive issue, but again, if we can't talk about stuff openly, then we can't talk about anything. So there you go. There's democracy for you. But the Manchester attack, I'm wondering, with regard to attacks of that nature, this is obviously, like certainly targeted a synagogue, certainly killed members of the Jewish community in Britain. But these sort of things, these actions fan the flames. Is there any way in which, say, the government of Britain or the government of Australia or the government of the United States, for that matter, can get on top of this open security vulnerability to their local Jewish communities? Because it's now a case that the wars in the Middle East and look, multicultural societies, the very notion of multiculturalism, I think, has a lot to do with this, and that is if your society is built up on seeing the other as different from you and you're not part of the national framework, you've got your old Australians on the one side, you've got your new Australians on the other, and never the twain shall they meet. They sort of all live parallel to each other rather than live with each other. Obviously, here in Australia, it plays out with regard to local Jewish communities going up against local Muslim communities. There is no good thing that comes out of this because what we see is a conflict, an ancient conflict for that matter, many thousands of kilometres away from where we live, are now playing themselves out on the streets of Sydney, or Melbourne, or in Manchester or London or wherever else they'll pop up. But this can't be good because, of course, we want to live in stable communities. But if these games, these political games at the highest strategic level keep on being played out, no one is ever going to be safe at any time.
Absolutely correct. And if I was, but again, I heard that I don't know the formal ranks, but the chief of the New South Wales Police
Mm,
basically said that they had overhyped anti-Semitic incidents, that any
mm,
that occurred, and I'm not downplaying anti-Semitism. Of course, it's there. But if I was
Mm.
um, the premier of an Australian state, or if I was Prime Minister of Australia or any other country, I would come down hard on all sides. I would not
Oh,
tolerate. I
I'm
would
into
not.
that.
I would not
Mm.
tolerate anything from anyone.
Yeah, yeah.
And if I was Sir Keir Starmer and Israel invited Tommy Robinson to an official visit, I
Mm.
would call in the Israeli ambassador for a reprimand and would suspend relations for a while.
Yes.
I would make my stand very clear. This is not for us. This is not our doing. We will
Mm.
not have any of this from any of you. Okay,
Mm. Mm.
and that seems very sensible and logical to me. But the problem is that the discourse is um, inherently biased, and the Israeli government utilizes that and weaponizes that to such an extent that it's almost impossible to imagine a striking a clear-sighted balance
Mm.
that says I'm concerned about the safety of the citizens of Australia.
Mm.
That's
Mm.
the only thing that concerns me. This will take time, but most definitely, I would really take no crap from anyone if I was in
Yeah.
charge.
See, I like that. I'd vote for you, Ori, no problems at all. But let me put it to you bluntly. In this country, multiculturalism isn't just a descriptive, it's a political doctrine, which we've now grown into a bit of a monster here. Because now our politicians, rather than playing the Australia card and saying, wherever you come from, whatever the color of your skin, whatever God you worship, as soon as you sign your name on the citizenship papers, you're Australia first. Whatever happens afterwards, how you pray, that's all your private business. No one cares about that. But now we've got politicians actively soliciting for ethnic votes. There's the Jewish vote, there's the Muslim vote. Various seats are contingent upon getting a vote for a government to come into office, both at the state and the federal levels. So we're playing games with the communities that expose us to vulnerabilities that should not exist. And I totally agree with you there. But, again, for us to cure ourselves of that illness will take at least 2 or 3 generations just there, just there.
I agree with you. I think the
Mm.
world is at a threshold. And I
Yeah.
think in many ways, the order that took root, I don't know how many years ago, but the prevailing order that is
Mm.
is gradually disintegrating.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. And I am not a conservative.
Mm.
I guess more of a socialist than a social democrat even. But I
Mm.
think that it is time to recommit to universal values.
They've gone
You know,
missing in action.
I want them. I want
Uh,
human solidarity. I want a commitment to humanity. We don't
mm.
have to agree about what they are, but yes, most definitely universal values. And
Mm.
universal values as the antidote to weaponized supremacism,
Yes.
to self-inflicted victimhood, to
Mm.
everything that has allowed the situation to completely get out of hand. And I'm pleased, I guess, to see that there are signs of reckoning that this is where we actually are. That this isn't
Mm.
just about Gaza, and this
Yes.
isn't just about the monstrosity of Zionism, because that's easy. I get a lot of um, criticism where people on the global left will say, you're great, you keep writing on Twitter, and that's great, but that's completely worthless. Leave your stolen home, go back to Europe where you came from, and let Palestinians live in peace.
Mm.
Or if you're so upset at what's happening in Gaza, why don't you fill your car with food and water, drive to the Gazan border, break through the barricades, and continue driving till you're shot so Palestinians can have some sustenance? All right, you know, sure.
Jesus.
Why not? What am I going to say to that? I don't even respond to that.
Yeah. No, you can't.
No, so, but that's like the ultimate fringe of what you're describing. You're describing
Mm.
politicians going for ethnic votes. This is a person who really believes that the only way things will turn out okay is if his sense of what's right and what's wrong will be addressed adequately.
Mm.
That's not just frivolous, it's stupid. Okay.
It is.
So
Yes.
so I'm with you entirely at a principled level.
Mm.
It's time for the world to realize that it has to commit to a universal agenda or it will simply disintegrate.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Now back onto more mundane issues, shall we?
By all means.
All right. So inside Israel, the ceasefire itself has split opinion. Some see it as a necessary pause, others a capitulation. How is it playing politically with Netanyahu's coalition, the opposition, and among ordinary Israelis?
Yeah. I think the great majority of Jewish Israelis and certainly Palestinian Israelis see the ceasefire as a good thing.
Right.
And the end of the war, if you will, is a good thing. But of course, it only gets complicated from there because for liberal Israelis, if you will, the end of the war is just a sign to revert to the nearly complete solipsistic state in which we live. This notion that we are the only real people around and the only thing that matters is what happens to us.
Mhm.
Okay, the war is over. There's a line. Gazans can go screw themselves. It's not our problem. We will shoot them if they cross the line. As long as they stay on their side of the line, that's good. Which, of course, reinforces the occupation and the chaos in Gaza, and does absolutely nothing to um, acknowledge Israel's responsibility for the humanitarian situation in the Strip. So Israelis really wanted this to end, but they wanted this to end so they could go back to doing their own thing and simply not caring and have an official authorization not to care. Because that's the situation, I think the ceasefire is actually good for Netanyahu. At an immediate level, it's difficult to negotiate because he does have a base that is part of which is very much ideological, believes in settling Gaza and in the expansion of the Jewish empire and in a divine mandate to take as much land as possible and so on and so forth. But despite appearances to the contrary, that's a very sectorial movement. Most Israelis don't ally themselves with this element. And by the way, recent polling shows that this political party, calling itself religious Zionism, doesn't even get into parliament at the next national election. Okay, so it doesn't have much support. So why is this good for Netanyahu? Because Netanyahu will be appeasing this base as long as he can keep them in government. But once they're out of government, Netanyahu will have absolutely no problem flipping. Netanyahu will say, hey, I
Yeah.
was the prime minister who fought the difficult war. Okay, I
Mm.
led you through 2 years of hell.
Mm.
I am also the prime minister who brings the difficult peace. Okay, I've negotiated this deal. I've persuaded Trump to vouch for the end of the war. I brought the hostages back home. Vote for me. And you know what? I think there's a really good chance that most Israelis will. I don't think he's going to win in a landslide, but there's a good chance that most Israelis will for two reasons. First is his would-be competitors don't contradict him. They don't say anything that is remotely different from what he's saying. They're
Yes.
not calling for a Palestinian state. They're not calling for a political resolution. They're not calling for any kind of acknowledgement of Israel's actions in the war. They've adopted his solipsism, his siege mentality, his approach towards anti Semitism. And if Israelis are faced with the choice of voting for the original or voting for pale epigons, they're going to vote for the original. As
Yeah.
much as they
Yeah.
dislike him, as much as they don't trust him, they have consistently enabled his policies and have supported his policies actively. This is
He is
all.
the great survivor, Ori. He's a great
Yeah.
survivor.
No, but John, it's not just his own personal acumen. In doing
Mm.
that, he is very much quintessentially Israeli.
Mm.
Because here's the truth: most Israelis don't want to kill all the Palestinians.
Mhm.
Most Israelis don't want to grab Gaza for the purpose of settlement. Most Israelis want Palestinians to go away. Will they go away? We don't really care. If we can help them, if we can dispatch them, that's okay. But it's not intentional. Ask any Israeli and they'll tell you there's no official order saying kill as many Palestinians as you can every day.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
we're going after the bad guys. If Palestinians are there, that's their problem and the bad guys' problem. It's not ours. But
Yep.
most Israelis want the illusion of being left alone. They want to live ensconced in their own bubble. They want a perimeter, which also explains the Israeli incursions into Lebanon and Syria. They want a perimeter that's safe. They don't want to wake up and see Lebanese farmers right up next to the border wall, which happens in the part of the northern Israeli frontier.
Mm.
Right? They want those villages destroyed, which they were over the past 2 years. And as long as that's the case, we don't necessarily have to fight. You said before, to maintain security, we have to be on constant war footing. But we don't. We don't want to. What we want is to be left alone. We don't want anybody to mess with us.
Mm.
And Netanyahu can take that and parlay that into an eternity war. We have to fight the whole time. But once that eternity war wears out, once the expiration date is reached, he can now turn it into a functional peace deal.
Mm.
Okay, as long as that right is ensured, then we're okay. So let's talk about that right. Let's enter some kind of process that may or may not end in a Palestinian state or the end of the occupation. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
And most Israelis, the great majority of Israelis, agree with that. And Netanyahu reflects this deeply held Israeli conviction. We don't care and we want to be left alone. And that's exactly why, even when Israelis were out in the streets protesting for the return of the hostages, they were actually enabling and facilitating Netanyahu. I don't know if you followed this. There was a huge demonstration before the signing of the deal and the return of the hostages in Tel Aviv. Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner attended the demonstration and spoke to the crowd. And when Witkoff mentioned Netanyahu, the crowd booed.
Yes, I
Okay?
did see that.
So there
Yep.
was there were 2 days of frenzied discussion on the Israeli social sphere about whether this was proper and correct or right or useful or whatever.
Yeah.
What nobody noticed was that nobody spoke about anybody but Netanyahu. This was
Mm.
all Netanyahu. Should we have booed him or shouldn't we have booed him? Is he good or is he bad? Should he stay or
Mm.
should he go? None of his would-be competitors were even remotely mentioned. Okay, so as far as Israelis go, it's still all Netanyahu all the time. And if an election is called anytime in the next 6 months, he would be my best bet to win it.
So effectively, there's no opposition to Netanyahu. I mean, no one is
No,
prepared to actually take the fight to him. I mean,
no,
there are so many things that are obvious political controversies. The first of which would be the so-called independent review that needs to be done for figuring out how Israeli intelligence failed on October 7. I mean, that is a matter of some controversy. Not even something like this will a member of the opposition run with publicly.
no.
That's shocking. That's
Oh no,
absolutely shocking.
they'll run with it, John, but it's all done on a personal basis.
Right,
It's
right,
not a part of any kind of alternative vision for the country, because
right.
ultimately, what his opposition is offering is we'll do exactly what he did, but we'll do it better.
Hmm.
We won't
Hmm.
do anything different. He's failed because he's old, corrupt, mad, call it what you will. In
Hmm.
principle, what he's doing is okay. Okay, but we're just going to do it better. We're better managers. We're more professional. Nobody's saying, let's talk peace. Let's talk settlement. Let's talk
Hmm.
a different economic model.
Hmm.
Everybody is at arms about whether the ultra Orthodox are going to start serving in the military. They're
Yeah.
not. But even if they were, what are you actually saying? You're actually saying that the greatest priority of Israel at the moment is increasing the size of its military. Why? So it can fight more wars. But hey, how about fighting less wars? Nobody will ever say that.
Right,
Okay, so
right.
when Israelis are faced with the quandary of who to vote for, they will vote ultimately. They might lie about it in the polls, by the way, but they will
Yeah,
ultimately vote for the man who is a proven entity. We know
yeah,
what he
of course.
did. We know what he's capable of. He's the devil we know.
Mm,
Rather
mm,
than
mm.
vote for anybody who says exactly the same thing but hasn't done much of anything yet.
Right, right. Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
yeah,
Uh, Complex. All right. Okay. So taking that aside for a moment, because you're doing my head in, but Netanyahu insists there will be no Palestinian state. So should we take that literally? And if we do take that literally, what do we make of a 20-point peace plan? Because obviously that sits in contradiction to a plan that at least gives some sort of hope for a political settlement, a final political settlement between Israel and the Palestinians.
Well, some sort of hope is kind of what Netanyahu wants, because some sort of hope can always be obfuscated or wished away, or can simply fade due to circumstances on the ground.
Yeah.
Is Netanyahu fully committed to there being no Palestinian state? I suppose in a way he is, but in that he's no different from just about every other prime minister Israel has ever had.
Hmm. Hmm.
The official national Israeli project has always included the dissolution of a Palestinian national identity.
Yeah.
Okay, in any way or using any means to accomplish that end. And in truth, and we're returning to the beginning of our conversation, the question is not so much what Israel wants anymore, or it shouldn't be what Israel wants, because what Israel wants is, uh, I'll use the scientific term, is what Israel wants is wrong. Okay, is
Okay.
Israel wants leeway to do anything, everything, all the time. That's
Mm.
not the way the world works. That is not conducive to sustainable life, nationally, regionally, or globally. Israel is in error now, existentially. What it does, it does in a stark contradiction to the welfare of the world.
Mm.
Okay? I don't think Israel is inherently evil. I think this is a very human process that it could happen in many societies, but I think Israel has made wrong choices wherever it could. So, considering Israeli emotions, okay, for example, take the request that I think the British Prime Minister made after the Manchester attack for there to be no pro-Palestinian demonstrations the day after, as though they were offensive to Israeli sensibilities.
Mm.
The world should not care about Israeli sensibilities. The world should not wait for an Israel that is ready to join the fold once again. Israel not only is not ready, but is doing everything it can to remain outside.
Yep.
This is a time for superimposition. And does Netanyahu want a Palestinian state? Do Israelis want a Palestinian state? That is of absolutely no consequence. You know, even the International Court of Justice, not known for making any sort of um, binding decisions, has already decided, even though Israel has completely ignored that decision, that the entire Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories is illegal. It has decreed that Israel has to pay reparations. Let's say you don't buy into that, okay? But what it means is that the world is starting to see that Israel will not be a willing partner to any kind of process that restores and enhances security. Israel is an agent of chaos. You don't ask agents of chaos what they want. You tell them what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah? And Israel is now in a position where I can say this wholeheartedly as an Israeli, that will be the best thing for Israel by far.
Mm.
Being told what to do.
But it becomes even more complex for another reason, and that is, when we're looking at what can be a settlement for the Palestinians. The devil's always in the details, right? So we can have a ceasefire. The ceasefire can last for a few years at best, or a few months, or a couple of weeks, or even a couple of days. But when it comes to a final settlement between Israel and Palestine, what the Palestinians want, and again, we're talking about wants as opposed to needs or whatever, is the idea of sovereignty, full sovereignty. They want to have what has been stripped from them for such a long period of time. Now, to some within the Israeli elite, they may find that notion offensive. They may say that there'd be security problems with this kind of thing. And so we're then left with, well, okay, let's have a look and see how things could work out. Well, we have the West Bank. The West Bank appears to be the beginnings, if not the maturation of a Bantuization of the West Bank, where you've got a series of pseudo-autonomous enclaves crisscrossed by, Israeli-only roads and checkpoints and all kinds of things, which kind of give the ruling Palestinian Authority a simulation of self-rule, but there is no self-rule to be had. I can only imagine that what awaits Gaza will be something similar, where it's going to be crisscrossed by security corridors, the population will be contained to various areas and surveilled, and therefore, again, we're just, supporting this sort of numbers of Bantustans nominally called Palestinian areas. Is that fair, or does this oversimplify Israel's security rationale?
It certainly describes what the reality that Israel, certainly Israel currently, would find optimal in, say, a year or two from now.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I think there is a chance that we may see a different reality materialize on the ground, but that depends. I'll put it differently. What you're saying is almost the natural, obvious course of events, that this is where it will go. If Israel gets its way, if Israel is allowed to continue really carving out Bantustans in the West Bank, and ultimately perhaps doing it to Gaza as well. If the international forces that will come into Gaza will each have its own zone of influence, be sort of like Berlin after the Second World War,
Mm.
um, there's a very good chance that that will happen. That's a reasonable assumption. There's a chance that something else will happen, but the chance that something else will happen requires um, political resolve. Okay, it requires, it's true that the devil is in the details, but in this case, going back to what both of us said about, regarding universal values and universal
Mhm.
commitment, in this case, it's also about um, getting up the nerve to challenge the political conventional wisdom, certainly as it has been so far. And this is not going to be a rapid process. This is going to be more
Yeah.
reminiscent of South Africa than anything else. This
Hmm.
idea that positions can change and need to change. And there are a lot of potential bellwethers, the UK being one of them, by the way. If you see an implosion of both Labour and the Conservatives, and right now you're seeing very weird numbers, polling numbers coming out of the UK.
Oh yeah.
If you see an implosion there, if you see something new happening in France, if you see a realignment of Middle Eastern power brokering, where the US sides with the Gulf monarchies immediately and contractually, and not with Israel, with whom it doesn't have a defense pact, by the way.
Mm.
If you see best practices beginning to change, not justifications, not motivational talks, not moral principles, but exactly. I think this incident in the UK with West Midlands Police deciding to deny the football fans entry to the pitch is a really big deal
Mhm.
because this isn't, this wasn't a political directive. This wasn't necessarily done in consultation with the Muslim citizens of Birmingham. This was West Midlands Police following the professional opinion of something called the Safety Advisory Group that does risk management. If it becomes risky to enable a political situation that would allow the kind of, I'll call it injustice because it is injustice, the injustice that you described in the West Bank and in Gaza to be perpetuated. If it becomes risky, if it incurs demonstrations, if it's a political liability, if it is not simply accepted as a fait accompli or as, the way of the world, simply because that's how it's done, and there's a good chance we will see a different reality. The Palestinian case is interesting, and that's not a point I think that is often made because it is very, very specific and limited and constrained in size and can be grasped and understood simply by, learning the facts or visiting, or it's not a conflict, despite what Trump said, it's not a 3,000 year conflict.
Yeah.
It's about a century long and probably even less so. It's something that can be understood, and it's a weird situation because, and I've gotten this a lot over the past 2 years.
Mm.
Reality seems like it's convoluted and um, conflicted and mixed up and very difficult to navigate. Whereas where the spin seems self-explanatory and obvious and logical. The real challenge here, I don't think it's a detail. I think it's understanding that what you see is actually what's happening.
Right.
The, the reality on the ground is actually what it is. It's not anti-Semitism. It's not security. It's not. It is what it is, and that is almost unbelievably difficult for large parts of the Western world to grasp. Certainly
Mhm.
for the leaderships that have gotten used to this self-inflicted gaslighting, if you will, that it's
Yeah.
about coming to terms with reality. If you manage, and that's a political challenge. That's a political endeavor. It's not retired colonels negotiating with each other. If you come to that political realization, the great majority of the detail in question can be resolved sooner rather than later. I'm fully convinced of that.
That's a very hopeful note. I will say that returning to something you've just mentioned a moment ago with regard to the political situation in Europe, I mean, in the unlikely but possible idea that Farage will form a British government, or, Marine Le Pen's National Front comes up, or the AfD in Germany comes up. I mean, we're seeing fundamental transformations of the European political space, which then means what to whatever Trump has initiated. I mean, will it make it easier for him and his deal making to sustain itself moving forward? Because they all seem to share a recognition that, the people have spoken, we're all populists, and we're all fighting for our respective national governments. And so there's a hardcore of realism to the new foreign policy mantras moving forward. Or will this just, fall over catastrophically, in your opinion?
Uh, First, don't forget the other side of the equation. You can
Mm.
see AfD rising in Germany and Farage forming a government
Yeah.
and the National Front rising to power, but you can also see the new politics of the left taking shape and form, and they have spent the
Mm.
last 2 years organizing.
Yep.
You can see Zohran Mandani winning in New York City. You can see a new message on the left side of the Democratic Party in the United States. All of these things are there.
Yeah.
The upheavals are going to be, I think, conducive to the way Trump does things because you can't conceive of a grand vision that is realized as is. Everything's incremental, everything is day to day, everything depends on context. Do I think that a, a, a right wing Europe stands a good chance of uh, uh, deepening its hold on power? Maybe, but I'm optimistic when I look at Hungary, for example, where
Mm. How so?
despite valiant attempts on Orban's part, valiant successful attempts on Orban's part for 15 or 16 years now, is it?
Mm.
Um, they crack eventually. These parties, these populist parties, have a culture of secrecy and private agendas that are often in conflict with their clearly nationalist populist
Mm.
message.
Mm.
Orban is taking it right and left for personal corruption. His opponents stand, I think, the best chance they've had in a long, long time of beating Fidesz in a national election. Um, Marine Le Pen and Farage and AfD, they all have various skeletons in their closet. I don't know if they are up for scrutiny. If there's one good thing to say for um, socialists in the European mode is that they are nerds, usually. You know, they
Yeah,
represent what you see is often what you get.
yeah, yeah.
But it's not just that. It's look again. Take the United States. The criticism levied at Trump from the right of the MAGA movement is not just about his foreign policy. It's about social policy as well. It's about mega corporations taking money from American workers. It's about living conditions deteriorating in the United States. It's about the lack of basic rights. And I am the recipient of very good medical care in public medical care in Israel. So I am
Mm.
a benefactor of American aid. But when I hear your Marjorie Taylor Greene say, you can give billions to promote civil welfare in Israel, but Americans get $0 to promote their medical care. And you hear this from the right, not from the left.
Yeah, yeah.
Things are changing.
Mm.
Things are changing. The grand alliance of capitalism that brought together the stable Blairite, Clintonite left
Mm.
and the great corporate tycoons, the new robber barons, that had their interests converged, that is being challenged. And it's being challenged not just from the hippy dippy left,
Mhm.
but from the very staunch right. So I think things are changing. And an ideological position of the sort that Israel seems to be embracing in favor of Judeo Christian civilization and all that rot. That
Mhm.
is, I think, um, behind the times. So I don't know if we'll end up with Tucker Carlson as the next president of the United States. Okay, we may, or if we end up with an AOC Bernie ticket in 2028, if he is alive and well. But I think we're going to see changes. I don't think we're going to see another Clinton or Biden or even Obama voted into office in the United States. I don't think we're going to see another Keir Starmer voted into
Mm.
office in the UK. I don't think we're
Yeah.
going to see another Macron become president in France. So things are changing.
Interesting. Interesting. All right. We have to have a conversation on Hamas, because obviously there are two sides to this story, and the other side, it's got its own story to tell. So they've kind of won a symbolic legitimacy among elements within Gaza for the prisoner release, roughly 2,000 in total. And, it's also bought the Gazans some time to regroup. What incentive do they have to sustain a truce that dilutes their resistance credentials?
Uh, just that they're realistic. And that, by the way, is saying something because a lot of people ascribe complete irrationality to a movement like Hamas. That's simply not true.
Hmm.
Hamas is an extremely rational organization. Even the massacre in October 23 was a rational decision, as horrific as it may have been. It was very much calculated. It was a miscalculation in terms of some of the results achieved, but it was very much a calculated response. It was a decision meant to achieve a calculated end. And Hamas is now at the end of its rope. It cannot control the Gaza Strip. In Israel, if Israel isn't there, then Hamas is in control. That's not the reality on the ground. Hamas understands full well what's at stake, especially its leaders who are not a positive group. Okay, these are not people you want to get stranded on a desert isle with. These are people very much concerned for themselves, people who have plundered and have skimmed off the top and the sides repeatedly, and they understand that even in the name of their personal survival, they have to find a way to change the status quo. They cannot remain the sovereigns in Gaza because Gaza is no more. And in many ways, even though they are the only organization that has experience operating Gaza, even in a vacuum, that's not going to play out, especially now when there are a lot of people on the ground and those people don't like them. The
Yeah.
Emiratis don't like them, the Saudis don't like them. So Hamas wants a solution that will allow it to um, will allow its leadership to maintain their personal power and will allow it to be integrated into the Palestinian national struggle, even if it is no longer called Hamas. And I think they also want a negotiated solution. Because if they have a negotiated solution and they appear capable, rational, and somebody with whom you can do business now and at a later stage, that's what they want. And there's a good chance to assume that that is what they'll get. There's a good chance to assume that that will be um, ultimately a sort of a solution. Part of the leadership will be allowed to leave. They will be given guarantees that they will not be pursued by Israel. Hamas as a movement will be swallowed up by the PA, and the Palestinian Authority itself will gradually become the presence that controls Gaza, whether they like it or not. There will be election. There will be elections in the Palestinian Authority. Israel might be persuaded to release Marwan Barghouti, who may take charge of it. I don't know if that happens or not. But Hamas is very much a rational movement. It understands its current position. It wants to do everything it can to ameliorate the damages that it has incurred over the past 2 years.
But Ori, reports seem to be suggesting that a weakened Hamas is now fighting to reassert control, not against Israel, but against rival Gazan militias and clan-based groups. Some of these allegedly receive quiet Israeli support. Others, like the Dogmush clan, are powerful family-based militias whose ideology is less nationalistic and more Salafist jihadist, and therefore closer to ISIS or Al-Qaeda. How serious is the risk of a Gazan civil war right now, and what would that mean for the ceasefire and the peace process?
I First of all, about the Dogmush, I have reason to believe that they're not as closely related to ISIS as they may appear to be. I think they are, as you say, simply a family. They're just not very ideological. They're a
Right.
clan, and those clans prospered in Gaza during the chaos of the past 20 years. Hamas is fighting for control. It's fighting for control in chaotic conditions. Okay, there is no Gaza. It's fighting to assert control in what is almost a vacuum.
Mm.
You can see very directly from what Trump says that Trump understands what's happening, and Trump is okay with that. Trump understands Hamas to be doing what he would do if he was in a similar situation, if you will. I don't think we're likely to see a Gazan civil war. I don't get a sense that the um, potential opposition to Hamas is as powerful as it may appear now. Israel tried its best to disrupt any attempt Hamas might make at a transition into rule once Israel is out. I don't think Israel did a very good job. Hamas is fighting, but as far as I know, Gazans hate the clan-based militias as much as they hate Hamas. So it's
Mm.
not like we're talking about Gazans taking to the streets and fighting. And by the way, also another fact to remember, talking about reality and its very overt nature. Gazans are hungry. Gazans are homeless. Gazans have no strength for fighting.
Mm.
You
No.
don't. You need decent food to fight. Gazans don't have enough food to fight. So
Mm.
I don't think we'll be seeing a civil war in Gaza anytime soon.
You're listening to The Focus. I'm John Bruni, speaking with Israeli scholar Dr. Ori Goldberg. If you're enjoying this conversation, don't forget to follow The Focus on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. Our work is independent and listener driven, exploring the world's hardest questions with the people who live and think them. Join the discussion online, share your thoughts, and stay connected with us as we keep cutting through the noise and bringing clarity where it's needed most. Now back to the conversation. In a post that you had recently put up, Ori, you wrote, "The genocidal impulse, the need to define our life through their absence, is growing in Israel. Gaza is now on the other side of the line." What does that line mean in practice? How is it drawn politically, psychologically, spiritually between Israelis and Palestinians?
Oh, it may be the most initial perfunctory fact of life.
Mm.
When Israel was fighting in Gaza, then there was no line. Okay, Israelis were constantly in and out. Gaza was not a detached concept. Okay, the
Yeah.
hostages maybe were, but Gaza itself was very much here. It was very much present. Israelis always approve when it is possible to draw a line. And the line, again, is as conceptual as it is real. I mean, that line was drawn when Israel killed 3 hostages by mistake, because those hostages escaped their captors and they crossed the line. And when they were talking to IDF forces, some sniper who wasn't a part of the conversation realized that people had crossed the line and he killed them. Um, so this line is crucial, and I like that you used spiritually because I think there is a spiritual element here. This line is
Mm.
crucial for establishing and verifying um, Israeli aloneness, if you will, or
Yep.
solitary existence, the line that separates us from everybody, from the
Hmm.
Palestinians specifically, because they're the enemy and we need to be able to kill them if they cross the line, but from everybody, because nobody understands. It's very complex. Nobody gets what we live, the horrors that we live through here. So we need the line. And the blurring of the line, by the way, stretches between Jews and Muslims, for example.
Mm.
The line could be drawn around the synagogue in Manchester. A Muslim crossed it, attacked the synagogue, was punished for it, but also killed Jews. That's what happens when lines get crossed.
Yes.
And now that the war is quote unquote over, then the line can be reasserted. We are comfortable behind the line because the line gives us immediate justification. A few Palestinian civilians walked towards the ruins of their homes in Gaza City. They crossed the line. They didn't know they had crossed the line, or maybe they did, but they didn't think much of it because it's an
Hmm.
imaginary line. An Israeli drone killed them right on the spot and called them terrorists.
Right.
Uh, that's the line, and it's again a very crucial element for our self perception.
Hmm. I suppose this is also related to another quote that you recently wrote, and I quote: "This is Hasbara's last stand. The lies are now so all-encompassing that even debating them only lends legitimacy." End quote. Now, for our listeners, Hasbara, pardon my mangled Hebrew, roughly translates to, I think, public diplomacy or exchange
Well,
or something like that.
it comes from the Semitic root that means explanation. It means
Explanation. That's right.
it means to explain. Ultimately, it is public diplomacy and exactly what you said, but literally it means explanation. We'll tell you
Right.
how it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, when you say this is Hezbollah's last stand, do you mean Israel's narrative of control is breaking down, or is it simply becoming more desperate and absolute?
Well, it's both.
Yeah, yeah,
Because Israel made the two contingent upon each other. You either
right.
accepted everything we said, and if you don't, then you accept nothing.
Mm,
Okay? It's either we're the victims, it's all anti-Semitism, they're terrorists, they're out to kill us. You have to accept it all. And
mm.
if you choose to question even one thing, then you are an enemy. Okay,
On the other side of the line. Yeah,
yes, exactly,
yes,
and
yeah,
that's exactly what's happening.
yeah.
Israel has constantly ratcheted up. Israel
Mm,
has constantly increased the volume. And now there's no other choice. You can't decrease. You can't say, okay, we'll reconsider. We can't reconsider. If we reconsider, then everything we've said and done over the past 2 years amounts to nothing.
yeah.
And that is not an act of which Israelis are capable at the moment. Not official Israel and not individual Israelis. We are in it make or break, a whole hog. Which is why it is the last stand. And now it's no longer about arguing data regarding truck entry into Gaza. Now it's a complete and utter denial of all, as Israelis would say, Hamas narratives. There
Mm,
was never a genocide. There was never a famine. Civilians were never wrongly killed. It's no longer about facts. It's about accepting it en masse. You either do it
yep.
or you don't.
Yep, yep. So, in an era of weaponized narratives, Ori, how does one counter disinformation without feeding it? Is there still value in public argument, or has dialogue itself become a trap?
Good question. I think it's mostly a trap because I don't think it's
Right.
dialogue.
Right.
I mean, I just had a rare Hebrew exchange on Twitter this morning with a journalist who I can't even explain it through any like real terms, but the minute you accepted her framing of the question, she immediately switched tacks. I won't bore your or our viewers and listeners with the details, but I'll just say that the defense collapsed very quickly and very systematically,
Mm.
and completely. Uh, Ultimately, we came to her telling me and another friend who was arguing with her that we had both been trained by Qatar and Russia, that we loved Hamas, that we hated Israel, that it's like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't, and when you accept the framing, I'll give you another example. I wrote something on Facebook in Hebrew, and a guy replied in Hebrew and said, "And you're not saying a word about our enemies, question mark, our haters, question mark, the people who would murder you the minute they saw your passport, question mark." So I said, "No, I don't respond to people who make statements. If you want to have a
Mm.
conversation, let's have a conversation." He said, "What are you
Mm.
talking about? I asked you three questions.
Mm.
If you accept those statements as questions, you're already suckered in, and there's no way you can win.
Yeah.
Because what am I
Yeah.
going to do? Am I going to demonstrate to this man that they wouldn't kill me the minute they saw me if they could? How can you demonstrate that? How can you say not everybody in Gaza is a terrorist? That sounds like a justification. It sounds like an equivocation when you're
Mm.
talking to a person who says everybody is a terrorist. At least in Israel, these conversations are pointless. What do you do? You constantly you constantly evoke the truth. You constantly touch the truth. You constantly talk about the truth. And you don't get into personal arguments. And it doesn't become about, I can't believe you're saying that. Believe everything. It's all true. Yeah.
The art of debate, Ori, is I think long gone.
Yes.
From this environment. And I suppose the one thing that I can say about the things that you raise, if you disengage entirely from the debate, it doesn't matter how you perceive the other person as being, I can't say irrational. That's a pejorative I don't want to use, but disagreeable to your view. If you don't go after these people in your own way, don't you risk ceding the field to the propagandists? I mean, how do you draw the line between moral clarity and intellectual isolation in this hoary old environment?
I guess it depends on one's frame of reference or one's horizon. I can say that in Israel specifically, these
Mm,
arguments are pointless. I love debates, John. I live
mm,
for debates, not for proving my victory, not for ascertaining my propriety. I love the dynamic. I love
mm,
talking to people, and I love talking to people who disagree with me. But in Israel right now, I can say that the fear and the paralysis and the hatred are so vitriolic. Uh, uh, it that it's just impossible. It's just impossible. And I'm not ceding anything. The field has been won, at least in Israel, a long time ago.
mm.
Uh, I do, however, get a sense that at least as far as the world goes, that's not the case. There's still a battle being waged.
Mhm.
But the battle is not, and in this sense, you're absolutely correct. The battle is not based on, hey, you didn't know that fact. Now that you do, you'll understand that you're wrong.
Yeah.
Okay? That's not what wins the day. What wins the day, I think, at least, is hearts and minds.
Mhm.
And there are good, dedicated, noble people who are doing the factual work of documenting injustice and building up legal cases. And I am full of admiration for them. And I support their work whenever I can.
mm.
But I really do think that the sea change that we've been discussing throughout the entirety of our conversation is about hearts and minds, not about facts.
Yeah,
This isn't about what
yeah,
Israel has done.
yeah.
Israel's done horrible things. Does it matter if Israel killed 80,000 or 100,000? I don't think it does. Of course, it matters to the people who died, but I don't think it does.
Mm.
So it's about hearts and minds. It's about, if I can be very analytical, it's about establishing new concepts.
Yes.
It's not about just the objective merit of the fact. It's about being prepared to establish new concepts. Um, yeah.
Ori, just finally, let's talk about immediate outcomes of all of this. I'm really happy that you're cautiously optimistic. That means that I can also relax and be a little bit more cautiously optimistic because, unfortunately, I'm usually guided by my cynicism. But anyway, let's talk the immediate outcomes, or talk about immediate outcomes, and that is, say we have three scenarios moving forward. Say scenario A would be like a managed freeze. The current truce limps on with no political solution for the Palestinians, not at least in the next 18 months. B would be the slow unraveling or the resumption of tit for tat strikes and the erosion of the current truce. And then option C would be a shock break. A major incident collapses the ceasefire overnight and we're back to war. Which do you see as most likely, and what's the trigger to watch?
Two is probably most likely in terms of, the reflexes of all the parties involved.
Mm,
Three is less likely, I think.
yeah.
Uh, One depends on so many factors, it's almost impossible to prognosticate.
Mm,
Uh, you don't, the trigger could be anything. Really, it could be anything. It could be a terrorist attack inside Israel. It could be an intentionally Ori Israeli strike. It could be. It's all about how you spin it politically. It's all about the political desire, which means that in order to avoid gradual collapse, even, there has to be a constant, well monitored regime of sticks and carrots
mm,
that has little to do with specific events, but is constantly rewarding and taking away from the parties that are participating. Okay? Making it very obvious to them that they always have a lot to lose and a lot to win.
mm,
And if the Trump spirit, if you'll allow me that abhorrent combination, if it prevails, that is how it should prevail. Trusting no
right.
one, constantly backing up any kind of principled statement or commitment with very practical arrangements all the time, all the time, all the time. And
Mm,
again, I'm cautiously optimistic because even on things like the return of the bodies, Israel has been made to see reason, and
mm,
other people have stepped in and taken on some of the toll.
yep.
If there are Egyptian and Qatari and Turkish teams working in the street, again, as morally abhorrent as it is when you think that you have, at a very conservative estimate, tens of thousands of Palestinians under the rubble,
Mm,
that you've got a team looking for 18 Israeli bodies, well, that is the truth. It's still a very practical way of saying to Israel, hey, you don't get to just bomb because you want to bomb. We'll do this.
mm,
I don't know how long that will last, but it is a minimally auspicious beginning. Let's call it that.
yep. Great. Ori, thank you once again for your insight and for your candor.
My pleasure as always.
From Tel Aviv, that was Israeli scholar Dr. Ori Goldberg. Tonight, we've gone well beyond the headlines, from Trump's political gamble to Israel's moral exhaustion, from Gaza's internal fractures to the peril of a politics built on despair. If there's a single thread running through it all, it's that control without legitimacy is brittle and resistance without governance is ruinous. Now, on to questions for the audience. Is Israel creating peace through control or control through peace? Will Gaza become a series of modern Bantustans, managed enclaves designed to simulate autonomy while enforcing dependency? Can a ceasefire built on political despair and mutual distrust ever hold? Or are both sides simply buying time for the next round of war? Let us know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's a free way to support us. You can also subscribe to the podcast on the Auscast Network, iTunes, and Spotify, where we'd appreciate your 5-star reviews. Do you have comments or questions about the podcast? Post them in the comments section on YouTube, and I'll do my best to respond to as many as I can. My thanks as ever to the producers of The Focus, Neil Smart and Lynn Sear. Please stay connected with us on social media. Follow me on X at Bruni Doctor and follow The Focus on X at TheFocus_Sage. And don't forget Bluesky on the Focus pod adl.bsky.social. From Adelaide, South Australia, you've been listening to The Focus.